And welcome to another edition. And welcome to another edition of Carnivore Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with the esteemed Dr. Eric Lopkin. Yes, I was so excited to get going. I jumped in prematurely, but a lot to discuss. And Dr. Lopkin, I think he had a good point before we got on the air, and that's let's start off with the executive orders.
Well, Biden has been signing a flurry of executive orders, and allegedly, his agenda for all of these executive orders is to eliminate anything that Trump did, regardless of whether it was good or not. He signed an executive order to halt construction on the southern border wall. He has halted construction of the Keystone Pipeline. He put a moratorium on deportations of undocumented immigrants. That one was actually halted by the courts. And he is pushing forward this very liberal agenda that is, the Congressional Budget Office has already said some of his proposals will absolutely devastate the economy. He is putting tens of thousands of people out of
right?
That. Yes,
the $15 an hour wage. It's one of the things they cited, correct?
Yes, it is. Unfortunately, he can't do that by executive order, but they're talking about trying to shoehorn that into the COVID stimulus package. And unfortunately, with small businesses hanging on by a thread, forcing them to pay $15 minimum wage will just tip them over. They will shut down and not be able to reopen. And I think people need to realize that the sheer idea of a national minimum wage is ridiculous, because $15 an hour in New York City is unlivable. It's not enough to live on. $15 an hour in Arkansas, you can buy a mansion.
Yeah, but doesn't it really get into the fact, hold on, again, the very constituency that they want to help, they hurt, meaning liberal Democrats. The minimum wage was never intended to be a living wage. What it is a step up. So you have young people like myself, not anymore, obviously, young people like myself, back in high school, and you got your first job and huge training ground. But more importantly, forget about someone that, essentially didn't need that, but let's say an African American in the city, right? It's your first job, and you start, and a job is divine. And I saw that in terms of, it was a Sunday morning, Good Morning, and it was Ben Stein said that. He goes, a job is divine because it gives you so many things beyond money. So my point is, let's say a African American in the city, in a center city type of situation, gets a minimum wage job, Dr. Lopkin, things kind of change, don't they? And without that first step, everything like they say, the first leg of, no pun intended, of any journey starts with the first step. And that's essentially true with the minimum wage. You cut that off, to your point, obviously you're 100% correct that a $15 an hour wage, you're not going to have as many people get that leg up. So who does it hurt, Dr. Lopkin, in the end?
Yeah, it hurts the lower middle class, the lower class, because these are the people that actually have these jobs. And instead of having, say, 10 people making $11 an hour, once it goes up to 15, some of those people aren't going to be making anything if the business can afford to keep going at all. And what you said is something that people have seemed to have forgotten about. The minimum wage job is not supposed to be a job you stay in. It's supposed to get you experience in the job market so that you can build your skills and go on to better jobs. And the argument that the liberals are making is, well, you know, a lot of these people don't have marketable skills. Well, how is that the business owner's fault? The fact that you didn't pay attention in high school, the fact that you didn't develop any marketable skills is not the employer's fault. And
okay, but doesn't it even get to a bigger issue, Dr. Lopkin, is that many of these liberals, the limousine liberals, never really had to work, which is hysterical because the Democratic Party used to be the blue collar, and that's completely changed. Anyone who even debates that is essentially crazy.
No, Bernie Sanders has been saying for quite a while that the Democratic Party is now the party of Wall Street, and it has nothing to do with blue-collar America.
Yeah, and these people like Nancy Pelosi who grew up, you know, it was George H.W. Bush that was coined the term. He grew up with a silver spoon, and he grew up on third base and thought he hit a triple. Nancy Pelosi, any different, Dr. Lopkin? I mean, did she ever have a minimum wage job? Does she even know what that means? I mean, my point is out-of-touch liberalism.
Yeah, no, Nancy Pelosi has never held a non-political job in her life. So she doesn't understand what people go through. And in fact, there was a video not too long ago where in the middle of COVID, when people are worried about keeping their jobs, she was showing off this luxurious refrigerator freezer thing she has that cost thousands of dollars, completely oblivious to the fact that in her own city of San Francisco, there is a huge homeless problem. People can't afford to live there, and yet she is showing off her wealth. And, you know, you brought up George H.W. Bush, and I have to say it's much worse in the case of Nancy Pelosi, because Pelosi has never done anything. George H.W. Bush may have been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he joined the military and served his country.
Served his country? He had a lot more chutzpah than I ever had or anyone else in this audience.
Oh, yeah.
Is 17, 18 years old, doing a dauntless dive bomb operation, almost essentially, I'm sorry to say, a suicide mission. And you know what? It's interesting. The press called him a wimp until he died, when it served them their means, and they eulogized him as the greatest things in sliced bread. At the time, they called him a dummy and a wimp. A wimp? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and that, you know, we're dealing with that now. You haven't seen anything about Joe Biden's disastrous decisions on the mainstream media. They're pumping him up. He's a great president. Look at everything he's doing. It's like, no, his executive orders are literally destroying the economy. They are taking.
Okay, but when does that? Wait, Dr. Lopkin, that's that is an exceptional point. But when, and we've talked about this on podcasts on our Carnivore Bites, you can't do that forever. Even if you have the ill intention of propping someone that's well beyond his prime and doing disaster. Let me throw you back to Jimmy Carter. And it's really funny. I saw an infomercial, and they were talking about Saturday Night Live, you know, the glory days, whatever. And they had a couple things with Dan Aykroyd impersonating Jimmy Carter, and it was all this great, positive spin. Well, by the time 1979 happened, that was out the window, even in the mainstream media. I know it's not as crazy and to the left that it is now, but it just by fate, it cannot go on forever, Dr. Lopkin. I mean, when he's on the world stage, with world leaders, and he looks like, Forrest Gump, that ain't going to go, that's not going to be too groovy.
No, it's not. And I will bring up, now, this is a theory that I have heard. I'm coming out with saying I have no evidence that this is what they're trying to do. It's simply something that has been postulated. But I have heard a number of political insiders and pundits talk about the fact that they fully expect the mainstream media to turn on Biden because they are going to start showcasing that he is incompetent, that he has dementia, so that the Democratic Party can remove him and put Kamala Harris in president, which is what they wanted to do in the first place.
Okay, let's discuss that. I know we're somewhat close to a break. I disagree, my learned companion.
Well, I'm just reporting on a theory.
No,
I'm not saying it's
Dr.
happening.
Lopkin, but I'm throwing it out for a discussion and for our listeners. I believe Kamala, to use a corporate term, was the poison pill. And I've had experience in that in terms of corporations, let's say, acquiring a company that they know intentionally is not good, other companies from acquiring them. I believe, yes, of course it helps an African-American woman. I get it. But she's hardly, to quote the Saturday Night Live example I just outlined, she's hardly ready for prime time.
Prime time. No, I fully agree with that. Personally, my own opinion is that I think Kamala Harris was simply added to the ticket to placate the liberal left and try to hold the party together long enough to win an election, and nothing else.
You're probably right on that.
I don't think they ever intended to put her, in the top seat.
As the poison pill, I got you.
Yeah. But what we're seeing is, and there's also a lot of talk that Biden isn't even aware of all of the things that he's signing, which the fact that people are even talking about this is frightening. Because there was, I don't know if you're familiar with the British television show Doctor Who.
Of course, yeah.
There was, okay, well, for anybody who's not, it's a science fiction show that's been running for over 50 years. And there was an episode where the main character was butting heads with the British Prime Minister. And he gets her out of office by walking over to a reporter and whispering in the reporter's ear, "Doesn't she look tired?" And then the rumors start, and then can't stay in office because people think she's sick. I think that is a lot of what's going on already with Biden. It's, he doesn't look like he's all there. He does. Now,
yeah, but a press is supposed to serve us. I understand. You're 100% on. I get it. You're accurate. But doesn't it really point to our press not doing its job? That's why for one thing, its ratings are so low. Their intention, philosophically at least, metaphysically, was to serve the people. They let us down. That's a discussion before you marry, before you get pregnant. Now it's kind of too late, isn't it?
They have certainly let us down, and I will talk more about that right after this message. Stay tuned.
To reach the next level, you need to operate at peak performance. The key to this is mastering the 7 elements of success. Learn how to master mindset, focus, operations, communications, innovation, evaluation metrics, and continuous improvement. Get the Biznetics way at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and bookstores near you.
And we're back. And remember, you can be part of this conversation by calling us at 563-999-3693. That's 563-999-3693. So before the break, we were talking about how the press has let us down, how now there's a rumor campaign about Biden's health, but yet prior to the election, any mention of his health, his potential dementia, it was misinformation by the Russians. That was what their story was. And the fact of the matter is, if you take a look at what the Democrats were saying prior to the election and what they're saying after the election, you should be terrified. Because prior to the election, they were saying, oh, the vaccine was pushed through. There's no scientific basis for the vaccine. After the election, oh, everybody's got to be vaccinated. It's a good vaccine. It's been scientifically proved. Biden has dementia. Oh, it's a Russian disinformation. It's not happening. After the election, oh, well, maybe we need to take a look at this and, we need to watch out for this. It just shows a pattern of massive lies and fraud by the Democratic Party.
But that's fine.
And
if it's a party, hold on. If it's a party, Republicans have, let's say, bent the truth in their past, and obviously so have the Democrats. But when the media, the so-called fact checker, is on board with someone who clearly has dementia, clearly, and I'm hardly a medical expert, clearly, he shouts when he talks. He has no idea where he is. Before he's elected, was my original point, is the time to do that. Not when the boat has already left, the yacht, the shore. That's not the time.
And that's exactly where I was going with this. You have this pattern of lies and fraud that the press, because it served their purpose, stuck their head in the sand. Anytime Trump got anything wrong, they jumped all over him. Why? They hated him. They wanted him out of office, so they ignored stories about Hunter Biden, which, by the way, after the election, they came out and went, oh, yes, there are facts here, and we should investigate this. But before the election, they put their agenda in front of the good of the American people. And, I've said this over and over again, and people go, well, why would they do that? What's their motivation for doing that? If you look at Biden's appointees, you see what their motivation is, because he has actually brought into his administration a number of former CNN executives and reporters.
Yeah, but, I think it's bigger than that. And I really don't know the answer. But there's something bigger than a couple of appointments. Could it be that journalism school is now a breeding ground for liberal activism? I think that's number one. I think the whole, the whole thing with Watergate, with, let's just say, liberal activism in journalism, all the president's men, they grew up with that stuff. And my dark side says it's more even of a corporate agenda, a globalist agenda. It's got to be more than a couple of appointments. I'll throw it out to you, but there's something more. It was so strategic that it's beyond just a couple people trying to get ahead. What do you think?
Oh, it's definitely more than that. It's actually a series of things that have been building for years. You mentioned Woodward and Bernstein and All the President's Men. That was a turning point for journalism, because when Woodward and Bernstein took on the story, they were following a lead, and they followed where it went, and they gathered evidence. However, if you look at how the story was then turned into All the President's Men, the movie, it's no longer about following a story. It's about unseating a president. And that became the goal of journalism students that grew up with this story. It was no longer,
that's my point.
let's follow the facts. It was, I can make a name for myself if I take somebody big down. So let's find who I can take down. So that's the beginning of it. Then we've talked over and over again about the echo chamber. So, the networks decide who they want their audience to be, and they only report news that is positive for their audience, which is not the truth, and it's done on both sides of the aisle. So you have that added to it. Then, on top of all of this, you have the Internet. The Internet changed media forever because, one, it became more important to get a story out first than it was to get the story right, and two, because so much content was given away for free, people can't even make a living as a journalist anymore unless they're an anchor on a network news or they've got, a big deal with one of the media, and you only do that by playing ball with what the media outlet wants to report.
Okay, and what we're left with, Dr. Lopkin, though, is forget about being on the left or the right. You have a president. Any objective scrutiny is not up for the job. And someone, Jesse Waters, I don't agree with him all the time, from Fox, his analysis was spot on. You had Reagan, the last 2 years of his 8-year presidency, was probably not up for the job, probably had dementia. But that was, the tail end of his presidency. In the last year of a presidency really is all just, kind of an 8-year presidency, not a 4. Is just kind of like, you're on autopilot anyway. It's no big deal. You're a lame duck. Now we're talking about a president beginning his presidency already with dementia. That is scary almost 40 years later. That is terrifying.
I honestly believe that the Democratic Party could have put up a glass of water to run for president, and the media would have eaten it up because the hatred they had of President Bush was so great because, one, he proved them all wrong. He proved they didn't know what they were talking about in the 2016 election. Second of all, he called them out over and over again for their bias and their fake news. So they wanted him out of office so badly, they would have propped up a glass of water against him.
I agree, but I'll reference my Nixon analogy. Nixon said in 1973, and by the way, given what he did versus even Barack Obama did, was child's play. But he did say, and I thought Nixon in many ways was a brilliant man, and he said, I gave them the knife and they twisted it. Didn't Trump give the liberal media or the mainstream? He gave them the knife and they twisted it, and it's 50 years, 40 years later, but it's true. Yes, he did. That is really the irony of it all. If he just kept it together, but both leaders are it's actually true. You know something? I know your father was involved in Vietnam, and God bless him. If Nixon did not get impeached, I think we would have had an honorable settlement. If Trump didn't screw up, we would have had many things that were great. America is not the better for both situations. True or not?
That's definitely true. I mean, remember, the media keeps burying the story about Trump. 4 Middle East peace treaties. That is unprecedented. I actually saw an economic advisor from the Obama administration try to claim that the reason we are in our current economic situation because of the Trump tax cut, and not because coronavirus shut down work. And thankfully, the anchors actually called him on it, because it was a ridiculous assertion. We are in this situation because businesses were shut down because of coronavirus. The Trump tax
and
cut
actually,
had nothing
Trump
to do with it.
Was a firewall that prevented a even worse shutdown. And I think he kind of screwed up the coronavirus situation. That's another discussion. But he at least was the voice of reason, in quotations, even though he did not message that correctly in any way whatsoever. But you don't shut down. If you're Rhode Island, you can shut down everything. You're Rhode Island. It's the United States. Even from a basically a situation in terms of a medical perspective, there was really little you could do but what he did, which was fast-tracking the vaccine. Other than that, it was all window dressing, but window dressing sells, and he screwed it up.
And even more than that, though, he did not have the information he needed, because we found out today in an announcement by the New York Attorney General that Andrew Cuomo undercounted the COVID cases in New York in their nursing homes by 50%. So you had a Democratic governor lying about the severity of the pandemic in his own state, and then trying to blame the Trump administration for not helping them.
I like that you bring that up. I really have to mention that before we close this segment out, this broadcast out. Cuomo. That's mirror images of Trump. Cuomo gets a free pass. There are so many things. It's cost thousands of lives. But he was the rock star. He was the Elton John, the Elvis. Everyone loved him because, I'm sorry to say, he was more articulate and polished. He was, forget about the bias, than Trump. But in the end, he was more incompetent than Trump would be in his worst moment. Your reflection.
Yes, he was. Because of this new information, New York actually is the worst place for COVID. They overtook California, which was, took some doing. But it was the Democratic governors that did not do what they were supposed to do and tried to blame the federal government. And we are just about out of time. So you have been listening to Carnivore Radio. You can catch us every Friday at 4 at blogtalkradio.com/Carnivore Radio. You can catch the replay as well as the Carnivore Bites podcast, which is all part of the Xvadio podcast network at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. We'll see you here next week.
Dr. Lopkin, thanks a lot, and we'll be back next week with a little bit of a Super Bowl recap.